My name is Nadia Osei. I'm 32 years old. I work as a trauma surgeon at Mercy General in Philadelphia. Most of what I do, the decisions I make in the span of 40 seconds, the hands that go into someone's chest while their family is still finding parking. None of that follows me into a dinner party. People don't want to hear it, I've learned that. So when my brother's assistant called to tell me I'd been added to the guest list for his company's 10th anniversary gala, I almost didn't go. Almost. The invitation was printed on cardstock thick enough to stop a letter opener. My brother's name was embossed at the top in gold. Mine was handwritten in blue ballpoint at the bottom of the +1 line. Like an afterthought. Like someone had remembered at the last minute that he had a sister. I wore my nicest blazer. Navy, structured. The one I bought for my residency graduation and hadn't touched since. No jewelry except my hospital ID clipped to my pocket out of habit. I caught it in the elevator reflection and took it off. Even that felt like I was trying too hard to prove something. The venue was a converted warehouse in Old City, the kind of place that costs $12,000 to rent for a night and pretends to be humble about it. Edison bulbs, exposed brick, a raw bar along the east wall. My brother had done well for himself. Venture capital. He was very good at being in rooms where money moved quietly from one hand to another, and he was even better at making people feel like they'd been chosen. I spotted my seat before I spotted him. Table 11. Tucked behind the DJ booth, half obscured by a speaker tower. No name card. Someone had written my name on a sticky note and pressed it to the base of a water glass. I peeled it off and set it face down. My brother found me 20 minutes later, when the speeches were starting. He was already holding a microphone, already glowing. He had the easy confidence of someone who had never once doubted that a room wanted to hear from him. He introduced his partners, his investors, his college roommate who'd given him his first $50,000. He thanked his wife. He thanked his kids. He thanked the caterer by name. Then he looked at me, standing near the bar with a club soda, and he smiled. "And I'd be remiss," he said, "if I didn't acknowledge my little sister Nadia. She's here somewhere. She's a doctor, everyone. Well, she cuts people open for a living." He paused for the laugh. He got it. We're still waiting for her to do something the rest of us can actually understand. More laughter. Polite, scattered, wine softened. A woman near the front actually turned to look at me with a small, sympathetic smile. The kind you give someone who's just been publicly embarrassed and doesn't know how to react. I set down my club soda. I didn't flinch. I had learned a long time ago that my brother's humor was a scalpel dressed up as a butter knife. He never cut deep enough to draw blood in public, but he never missed either. I found my table. I ate the salmon. I watched the room breathe around me, all that money and ambition and carefully maintained friendships. And I thought about a Tuesday morning 4 years ago, when everything I had worked for quietly disappeared. I had been on the shortlist for the chief of trauma surgery position at Jefferson University Hospital. It was the kind of role that doesn't get advertised publicly. You get nominated by your department head, vetted by a committee, and then the committee deliberates for 6 weeks. I had been to 3 rounds. I had submitted my case files, my research, my outcomes data. My department head had told me, and I'm quoting her exactly, "Nadia, this is yours, unless you do something to take yourself out of the running." 3 days before the final interview, I got a call from HR. There had been a complaint. Anonymous. It alleged a pattern of unprofessional conduct, specifically that I had a history of taking credit for collaborative work and demoralizing junior residents through what the letter called targeted exclusion. I asked to see the complaint. They read me 2 sentences over the phone and told me the rest was under review. I asked what under review meant for my candidacy. There was a pause. Then the HR coordinator said carefully, "The committee has been informed. They'll take it into account." I didn't get the position. For weeks, I combed through every interaction I could remember with my residents, every case debrief, every morning huddle. I ran through names. I ran through incidents. I couldn't locate the source of a complaint that fit that description because nothing like that had happened. Then one evening, I was reviewing old emails and I found a thread I had almost forgotten about. 8 months earlier, my brother had asked me to give a reference for a friend of his, someone trying to get a hospital administrative position at Jefferson. I had declined. Not unkindly. I explained I didn't know the person well enough to vouch for them professionally. I had CC'd my brother on the response. 2 weeks after that email, his friend had not gotten the position at Jefferson either. I hadn't thought about it again until now. I pulled up the transcript of the HR call on my notes app. I had written down the 2 sentences they'd read me verbatim. Dr. Osei has a documented history of undermining team-based care. Her reputation among residents is one of deliberate intimidation. Documented? That word sat wrong. Because I knew my outcomes. I knew my residents' satisfaction surveys. I knew that 2 of my former residents had specifically cited me in their fellowship applications as formative mentors. But documented was the kind of word that sounded certain even when it had nothing behind it. And then I found the phrase that stopped me, buried in what the HR coordinator had read, almost as a qualifier. Colleagues have expressed that her approach tends to be more lone wolf than collaborative. She does not encourage what one might call team-oriented synergy. Synergy. Nobody at a hospital writes that word. Not in a formal complaint, not anyone who has actually worked a trauma bay. That word lives in boardrooms and startup pitch decks, and the vocabulary of people who learned medicine from the outside looking in. My brother used it constantly. It was practically a tick. Team-oriented synergy. Cross-functional synergy. Synergistic outcomes. I had sat through enough family dinners listening to him to know exactly how that word sounded in his mouth. I couldn't prove it. Not then, but I felt it settle into my chest, like a diagnosis you already knew before the scan confirmed it. He hadn't done it with cruelty. He'd done it with precision. A phone call to the right person, a few sentences framed the right way. Not enough to trace, just enough to create doubt. And doubt in a committee deliberation is all it takes. I never said anything. Not to him, not to my parents, not to anyone. I accepted the outcome, went back to my shift, and rebuilt from the bottom of a list I had already climbed once. That was 4 years before the gala. I had arrived at that anniversary dinner, carrying all of that, and he had pointed me out from a stage and made the room laugh at my expense. And I had sat down at table 11 and eaten my salmon and waited. I don't know what I was waiting for exactly. Maybe I wasn't waiting for anything. Maybe I was just done. The speeches wound down. The DJ started something slow and forgettable. I was thinking about slipping out through the side door when I heard my name. Not from the stage this time. From a table near the front. A man I didn't recognize at first stood and turned toward me. 60s, silver-haired, wearing a suit that was expensive in the way that requires no one to notice it. He held his glass loosely, like someone comfortable with his own presence in a room. I recognized him when he moved into the light. Dr. Harmon Wilder, former chief of surgery at Penn Medicine. The man who had written the foundational protocols still used in 37 trauma centers across the country for managing hemorrhagic shock. I had read his work in my second year of residency. I had cited him in my board certification paper. He walked toward me with the deliberate calm of someone who had nothing to prove to a room. Dr. Osei, he said. He said it clearly. Not loudly. He didn't need to. The people near us went quiet by instinct. I want to shake your hand. I stood. I was at the Regional Trauma Symposium in October, he said. I watched you present the Cascade Protocol. I've been doing this for 38 years. He shook his head slightly, not in disbelief, but in something closer to recognition. The work you're doing is going to save lives that we didn't have the tools to save. I heard someone nearby set down a fork. Dr. Wilder turned just slightly toward the room, not addressing them but not ignoring them either. I don't know if this young woman's brother knows what she actually does, he said almost conversationally, but I'd encourage everyone here to look up her name. He extended his hand. I shook it, firm, brief, professional. The room had shifted in that quiet way. Rooms shift when something real happens inside them and no one is quite sure how to process it. Not applause, not drama, just the particular stillness of people recalibrating. I looked toward the stage. My brother was standing near his business partner. His expression had gone still in a way I recognized. The expression he wore when a meeting didn't go the way he'd scripted it. His wife was beside him with her hand on his arm and her eyes somewhere else entirely. I didn't smile. I didn't look away either. Dr. Wilder returned to his seat. The DJ picked up the tempo. The room slowly began to breathe again. But something had changed in the texture of the night. People looked at me differently, not with pity, not with curiosity. With the careful attention you give someone you've just been told you should have been paying attention to all along. I finished my water. Then I picked up my bag and I left. Not because I won. I didn't think of it that way. I left because I had arrived with everything I needed and none of it was in that room. I was back at the hospital by 10:30, scrubbed in by 11. There was a 24-year-old kid in Bay 3 with a splenic laceration and a blood pressure that had been dropping since the ambulance. My resident, a second year named Dr. Park, was at the bedside when I walked in. She looked up, saw me, and her shoulders dropped half an inch. The specific kind of relief that passes between a trainee and the person they trust. We worked. That's what I do. That's what I have always done. 3 days after the gala, my brother called. I let it ring. Not out of spite. I was in the middle of charting. When I called him back that evening, he answered on the first ring, which he never did. He said he'd looked up Dr. Wilder after the event. I said I knew who Dr. Wilder was. There was a silence that lasted longer than our silences usually did. I didn't know, he said finally. Which part? I said. Not a question. He didn't answer right away. I could hear him moving around on his end, the way he did when he was uncomfortable, when he needed to be in motion to say something that cost him. I didn't know it was going to go that far, he said. With the letter. I put my pen down. I made a call, he said. I was angry about the reference thing. I said some things to someone who knew someone at Jefferson admin. I didn't think. He stopped. I didn't think a few words would actually derail a 6-week evaluation process, I finished. Yes, the word came out of him like it had weight, not dramatic. Just heavy. I had imagined this conversation before. In the version in my head, I had a great deal to say. In practice, I found I didn't want to say most of it. Not because I had forgiven him, I hadn't, and I wasn't going to pretend otherwise. But because I had been carrying the not knowing for 4 years, and the knowing, even like this, even delivered badly over a phone call, felt different. Not lighter. Just different. I know what I cost you, he said. You don't, I said. But I appreciate that you said it. He asked if we could have dinner sometime. I said maybe. I meant it, which surprised me. I hung up and sat in my car in the hospital parking garage for a long time. The concrete above me was stamped with a level number in orange paint. Level 4. I had parked here 1,000 times. I had cried in this car twice, once after losing a patient I wasn't supposed to lose, once after my divorce was finalized. Both times I had sat in exactly this seat and then gone back inside. I sat there a while longer. Then I went back inside. The complaint had never been formally resolved. The position had gone to another candidate, a good surgeon, someone who deserved it. I had watched his name on the department website for 4 years and felt nothing complicated about it, which told me something about what I had actually been grieving. It wasn't the job exactly. It was the moment I realized the ground I stood on wasn't as solid as I had believed, that the work wasn't always enough, that someone who loved me, or who I thought loved me, had looked at something I'd built and decided to chip at the foundation. 6 weeks after the gala, I submitted my application for the Trauma Fellowship Directorship at my own hospital. It was a program I had helped design. I had trained 11 of its current fellows. When my department head called me into her office to discuss the application, she slid a folder across the desk and said, "We were waiting for you to apply." I didn't tell her about the Jefferson Committee. I didn't tell her about the letter or my brother's phone call or any of it. That wasn't her story to Callie. But I thought about it when they pinned the new lanyard on my badge at the start of the fellowship cycle. I thought about that word, synergy, and the way my brother had used it, and the way Dr. Wilder had said my name in a room full of people who had been perfectly happy to laugh at me 2 minutes before. I thought about Dr. Park, who had looked up from that trauma bay with relief in her eyes, and about the fourth-year fellow who had come to my office the week before to tell me she'd matched at Hopkins for vascular surgery, which was the program she had wanted since medical school. She had hugged me in a way that residents do not typically hug attendings, And I had let her because she had earned that moment, and so had I. I have never eaten lemon pie at my parents' house. That's not our family's version of the story. But we had a roast chicken that my mother made every Easter that I stopped eating the year I left for undergrad and never asked for again. Not because of anything that happened over that chicken, just because some things belong to a version of yourself you finished growing out of. My parents didn't come to the gala. My mother had a standing bridge game on Friday evenings that she'd kept for 15 years, and she'd told my brother the dates months in advance. She'd sent him a card. She'd sent me a text that said, "Proud of you, love, Mom," which was the entirety of our communication about the event. She didn't know about the letter. She didn't know about Jefferson. I hadn't told her because telling her would have meant watching her try to hold both of her children in the same hand, and I had never wanted to make that her problem. After the fellowship announcement, though, she called me on a Sunday morning. She had seen something on LinkedIn. One of my colleagues had posted about the directorship. She said, "Nadia, why didn't you tell me?" I said, "I'm telling you now." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Your father wants to take you to dinner." My father, who had spent my childhood asking if medicine was really what I wanted, or if I just liked the idea of it. My father, who had never once visited me at the hospital, not in 15 years of my working there. My father, who had driven 4 hours to see my brother ring the opening bell at some investment conference 3 years ago. I said, "Okay." We went to a steakhouse in Wilmington that my father loved. He wore a tie, which he only did for things that mattered to him. He ordered the same thing he always ordered. He waited until the bread had come before he said anything about any of it. "I should have paid more attention," he said. He was looking at the bread basket. I didn't fill the silence. "Your brother is." He stopped. "He's good at being in a room." "You always were too. Different room." It wasn't an apology. My father doesn't make apologies in direct sentences. He makes them sideways, in the shape of observations that cost him something to say out loud. "I know," I said. He reached across the table and put his hand briefly on mine, the way he had when I was small and we were crossing a street. Then he picked up his menu, even though he already knew what he was going to order. We ate dinner. We talked about his retirement, my mother's garden, the weather in March. On the way out, he held the door for me and said, "Dr. Osei," the way you say a name when you're trying it on for the first time and finding it fits. I said, "Thanks, Dad. My brother and I have had dinner twice now." The first time was strange. Not hostile, just the particular awkwardness of two people who have known each other their entire lives and are suddenly aware that they have been seeing slightly different versions of each other. He asked about the fellowship program. I asked about his new fund. We split a dessert neither of us really wanted. The second dinner was easier. He told me about a deal that had fallen through, and the way he described it was honest in a way I hadn't heard from him before. Not polished, not performed. Just a man who had miscalculated and was working out what to do next. I told him about a case I'd had that week, a 20-year-old who had come in through the trauma bay after a car accident and whose family had been in the waiting room for 6 hours not knowing if he would survive. I told my brother what it was like to walk out and look at those people and tell them their son was stable. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I'm sorry I made that joke at the gala." I said, "I know." He said, "I'm sorry about the other thing too." "I know that too," I said. We didn't hug when we left. We never did. But he texted me when he got home that night. "Just safe. You good?" I texted back, "Good. Get some sleep." That was something. I don't live for the moment when rooms turn. I've learned not to. Rooms turn, and then they turn again, and the person standing in the light at 9 o'clock is in shadow by midnight, and none of it is as permanent as it feels. What's permanent is the work. The residents who carry what you taught them into their own oars. The protocols that hold when everything else is failing. The 24-year-old in Bay 3, whose name I never learned because I wasn't the one to discharge him, but who went home to someone who loved him. That's what I think about. Dr. Wilder sent me a note 3 weeks after the gala, handwritten, on plain white paper, 2 short paragraphs. He wrote that he had heard through colleagues what had happened 4 years ago with the Jefferson candidacy, and that he hoped I understood it as a reflection of the system's limitations and not of my work. He wrote that he was stepping down from his advisory board at Penn and had recommended my name as a replacement. I read the note twice. Then I folded it and put it in the front pocket of my white coat where I kept things I wanted to remember to look at. That afternoon, between a consult and a post-op check, I sat in the resident lounge with a cup of coffee that had gone cold, and I thought about the sticky note with my name on it pressed to the base of a water glass at table 11. I thought about Dr. Park looking up from the bedside with her shoulders dropping half an inch. I thought about the word synergy and everything it had cost me and everything it hadn't. Then I finished my coffee, cold as it was, and I went back to work. That's the part no one puts in the invitation. The part that comes after the gala and the phone call and the dinner with your father in his tie. The part that is just you, returning to the thing you were always going to return to anyway. The thing that was never about any of them. I go back to it every day. I will go back to it tomorrow. And the day after that, someone's family will be in a waiting room, and I will walk out to them, and they will not know my name or my history or what was once written about me anonymously on a piece of paper. They will only know that I am the person who was there. That's enough. It has always been enough. I am Dr. Nadia Osei. I am 32 years old. I work as a trauma surgeon at Mercy General in Philadelphia, and I am only getting started. I've thought a lot about what actually happened that night, not the part where Dr. Wilder stood up, though I've replayed that moment more than I'd like to admit. I mean what happened before it. The years of it, the slow, quiet accumulation of being underestimated by someone who was supposed to know me best. My brother didn't set out to destroy anything. That's the part that took me the longest to sit with. He made a phone call when he was angry. He said some words to someone who knew someone. He probably told himself it would amount to nothing, that I'd land on my feet the way I always did, that the whole thing would dissolve before it caused any real damage. That's how people justify the small cruelties. They tell themselves the target is strong enough to absorb it. What he didn't account for was that strength isn't the same as invincibility. I absorbed it. And it cost me something I had spent years building. Not just the position at Jefferson, the trust in my own footing. The belief that working harder and doing it right was enough protection against the people who share your last name. That's the thing nobody tells you about betrayal from family. It doesn't arrive like a collision, it arrives like a slow leak. By the time you feel it, you've already lost some pressure and you can't always name when it started. I went back to work after Jefferson. I always go back to work. But there's a version of me that existed in the 2 years after that committee decision, who was quieter than she needed to be, more careful than the work required, more hesitant to put her name on things that deserved to have her name on them. That version of me was a direct result of a phone call my brother made on a Tuesday afternoon when he was irritated about a reference letter. He planted doubt. I watered it myself without knowing. What changed wasn't Dr. Wilder standing up in a room of people who had just laughed at me. That was a moment, and moments pass. What changed was that I stopped pretending the doubt had come from nowhere legitimate. Once I could name where it had come from, I could also name that it had never been mine to carry. There's a cause behind every effect. My brother's call caused a committee to hesitate. That hesitation caused me to lose a role I had earned. That loss caused me to spend 4 years rebuilding something that had never actually been broken, just obscured. And the rebuilding, which I did without anyone's help or acknowledgement, turned out to be its own kind of credential. Dr. Park looks up from a trauma bay and her shoulders drop half an inch because I have been there every time she needed me to be. That didn't come from a title. It came from every shift I worked in the years after Jefferson when I could have walked away and didn't. Integrity is not what you do when it's easy or when someone is watching. It's what you return to when the ground shifts and the committee doesn't call and the sticky note with your name on it is pressed to the bottom of a water glass at table 11. Resilience isn't dramatic. It doesn't look like triumph in the moment. It looks like cold coffee and a parking garage and going back inside anyway. My brother is trying now, imperfectly, slowly, in the sideways way of people who weren't raised to say hard things directly. I'm not ready to call it repaired, but I'm willing to call it a beginning, which is more than I thought I'd be able to say a year ago. That willingness, that's not weakness. That's a choice I made, because I understand now that holding on to what he cost me keeps me in a room with him even when I've already walked out the door. I don't need a Gala or a Dr. Wilder or a room going quiet to know what I am. I knew it at table 11. I knew it before that. The work always knew, even when I forgot.